So according to your notes, your first step says factor the radicand. There's two parts to step 1. So the first part of that, we're going to factor the radicand. Now, if you remember, the radicand is the number inside of your square root sign. So the number inside of our square root sign is called the radicand. We're going to factor that. You guys know how to factor at this point. So what two numbers can I multiply together to get 28?
2 and 14.
Okay, so we're going to use 2 and 14. You could also use 4 and 7. Those are fine too. Since 2 is a prime number, I'm going to circle that. What two numbers do you multiply together in order to get 14?
2 and 7.
2 and 7. Because these are prime numbers, I'm going to circle them. Now, from here, I'm going to go to the second part of step 1, which says rewrite. Your handwriting is a little bit difficult to read. Rewrite the radical, right, excuse me. Who has nicer handwriting? I'm sorry, Quenisha, I'm dissing your handwriting in front of everybody. Rewrite the radical with its prime factorization. So we're going to rewrite the radical with its prime factorization. So what that means, we're going to put our equal sign, our square root sign, and then we're going to write, because these are still under the square root, it's still under the radicand, we're going to write it under the square root sign, prime factorization. So my prime numbers are 2 times 2 times 7. So all of that is step 1. So then we move to step 2. Step 2 is going to say circle the pairs of factors in the radicand. So all you're going to do is look here and you're going to circle your pairs. So what are your pairs here?
2.
Yeah, so we just have a pair of 2. So I'm going to circle them. Then step 3 reads each factor pair. So basically, each factor pair in the radicand becomes a single factor in the coefficient. So each factor pair in the radicand becomes a single factor in the coefficient. Remember, our coefficient is the number on the outside of the square root. So squared cancels out with the square root. So my second 2 here will cancel out with the square root sign, and then I'm left with just that single 2 as a coefficient. However, I'm not finished because I have a 7 here still under the square root sign. So I'm going to have to keep that 7 under the square root sign. So it's going to be 2 square root 7 will be my final answer. So the square root of 28 simplified is 2 square root 7.
Okay, that's right.
Nice job. All right, so let's look at the next one here. So this one's a little bit different because we have the coefficient and the radicand. We're going to ignore the coefficient right now. We're going to pay attention to it in just a moment after we factor it. But for now, ignore the 5. David?
I was trying to this right. I got it.
Well, you got to show your work, and we'll look at it in just a second. So, 80. What times what equals 80?
80.
Okay. So then what two numbers can I multiply together to get 8, Quenisha?
4, 2 and 4.
Okay.
And 2 and 5. And 2 and 2.
2 and 2 for 4. So then we go to our 10, Quenisha. What are your factors for 10?
2 and 5.
Okay. So I went ahead and I factored my radicand. Now I'm going to come up to the right. I'm going to put my equal sign. Now this is where you need to pay attention to your coefficient. You're going to bring that 5 over and write it down as your coefficient. So I'm going to bring that 5. I'm going to write my 5 as the coefficient. Then I'm going to write my square root. And then I'm going to put my prime factorizations as my radicand here. So I'm going to do 5, square root, and then I'm going to take my prime numbers and write them under my square root sign.
Times 2 times 5.
Now, it is important to make sure that square root sign covers all your numbers. If it's not long enough, go ahead and draw it a little bit longer. So that's all of step 1 because all of those numbers are considered a square root. So step 2, I circle my factor pairs. What are my factor pairs here?
2, 2.
Yeah, I have 2 groups of 2's. Step 3, then I take each of my factor pairs and write it as a single number as the coefficient.
Can I borrow a Chromebook? Because she said this.
Who's for who?
This is not in her class. I was sure it says something.
Ooh, I'm missing one. Does Hawk still have 10?
You might.
Okay. So, when we go to write our coefficients, we can't forget about this 5. So we already have a 5 as a coefficient. Then I need to look at my factor pairs here. So my factor pairs are going to cancel with the square root, and I'm going to write them as a single number as a coefficient. So I'm going to have 5 times 2 times 2. Now, what number am I left with inside of my square root?
5.
So I'm going to have to draw my square root.
Yeah.
5. So that's step 3 according to your notes. Step 4 according to your notes says you're going to simplify. So you're going to simplify your outside number, which are your coefficients, which means you're just going to multiply them together. So 5 times 2 times 2 equals 20. And then simplify the inside, your radicand. Well, there's nothing that we can multiply, so it's just going to be square root 5. Yes, but you need to show all of this work, otherwise it doesn't matter if you're right. All right. Once you have all of that down, go ahead and flip it over, and let's take a look at the back side. The back side, we're simplifying the square root of 4,500, or 4,500.
45.
What two numbers can I use to multiply together to get 4,500?
5 and 900.
5 and what?
900.
5 and 900, okay.
And then you can circle your 5 since it's a
Okay.
9. And then 2 factors of 900 would be 9 and 100.
Okay.
And then 2 factors of 9 would be 3 and 3, and then you circle both 3's. And then 2 factors of 100 is 2 and 50.
I love that you're using different numbers than what I would have used, which is totally fine. Okay?
And then 2 and 25 is 2 and 50. And then circle your 2 again. And then 2 factors of 25 is 5 and 5. And then you circle both.
Nice. I'll give you a second to catch that up.
Yes, please do.
Earlier, first hour, we did 45 and 100 and factored down that way. But I mean, it's the same thing. You're going to end up, you're going to end up with the same prime numbers. So that's the first part of step 1. We factored our radicand. The second part is coming up and writing them in the radical. So I'm going to put my equal sign, bless you, my square root sign, and I'm going to put these all under my square root sign.
So it'd be 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 5 times 5.
What's wrong with how I wrote this?
Nah, you didn't even cross it out.
No,
We need another 5. We need another 5.
Oh,
no. David?
The
The
5's left
the
out.
thing, yes.
Yeah, the 5's left out. The square root sign's not long enough. All right. That's step 1. All right. Oh, and I missed a 5. Yeah. Ah.
you see 3.
Woo. Yeah, right. Thank you. All right.
I'll do my own birds.
What do you see?
No.
No, they're not all pairs. So let's circle our pairs. So what's my first pair?
2 and 2, 3 and 3, and 3 and 3, and 5 and 5.
So what's not a pair?
5.
Okay. So now I'm going to write these factor pairs as a single number, my coefficient. So what's my coefficient going to be?
5. Times 3 times. And then square 5.
You ain't gotta say
Okay. Then what?
And then square root
And square root what?
5.
Because we still have that 5 in there. Okay. Our final step here is going to be simplify our coefficient. So 2 times 3 is 6. Then 6 times 5 is 30. So my answer is going to be what?
30 and the square root of 5.
It's 30 square root 5.